A day unlike any other occurred. A day where the Earth was threatened by an extraterrestrial force unlike anything that had been seen before. In response to this, 6 individuals from all different walks of life came together, setting aside egos, personal agendas, pride and motives to be the sword and shield the Earth needed. The Avengers, Earth's mightiest heroes. Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, Black Widow and Hawkeye fought back the invading aliens called the Chitauri, led by none other than Thor's own brother, Loki. Together, the Avengers repelled the invading aliens, defeated Loki and achieved victory. After said victory, each one separated to go on their own adventures and harrowing dangers until reuniting, and have been openly active across the globe, fighting threats from London, to Africa, to Korea, and back home in America. And even though things changed, the ideals still remained the same. It had been several months after the Avengers had battled against the villainous AI that Tony Stark had created called Ultron. Since then, the Avengers had gone through a great change. Now the team had consisted of new faces led by some old ones. Captain America and Black Widow together lead the new Avengers, made up by Steve's good friend, Sam Wilson aka the Falcon, war veteran James Rhodes aka War Machine, the twins Pietro and Wanda Maximoff aka Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch. And last but not least, the synthetic android known simply as Vision. This was the new team of Avengers that operated at the new Avengers facility in upstate New York, the new safeguard of the world. And right now. You sure about this guy, Sam? Steve asked his friend, looking over the datapad in his hands. Damn sure. Falcon said with a confident nod. It all matches up and he's definitely a contender. So now we're recruiting a guy who can communicate with ants. Natasha said jokingly, though she too held interest in this subject. He sure kicked your ass good, Sam. Pietro said with a grin. Hey, I didn't know he could turn into a tic-tac. Sam rebutted with a huff, making Rhodes and Pietro laugh at his expense. But all things considered, this has to be a unanimous agreement. Steve said in total seriousness, surveying the team. Steve first looked to his right-hand man, woman really, Natasha. Nat looked up at Steve before shrugging and replying with, I'm all for new faces. Nodding, Cap then looked over to the others. Hey, if he can beat one of us in confrontation, he's got some potential. War Machine said with an accepting nod. Well, it gets a little boring with the same people over and over again, Pietro remarked, casually leaning back in his chair, so hey, I approve. His sister merely deadpanned at him, then faced Cap. You have my vote, Captain Wanda said with a friendly smile, and Cap gave her a nod of acceptance. I find that it is necessary to increase our ranks. Vision said sagely, crossing his arms together in thought. After the events that have transpired for the past few years and for what is yet to come, we must be ready. Though I do not know of this Ant-Man. I feel as though after what I have seen of him, he will be a great addition to this team. Well, that was a long philosophical way of saying yes. Falcon quipped, but hey, he's a good guy, so he's got my vote as well. It's decided then. Steve said a final nod. So Captain America leaned onto the table. Who wants to go convince our newest contender to be an Avenger? 1 week later, San Francisco. Scott Lang was currently eating at a diner, looking over some of his most recent enhancements of his suit, along with a much better understanding of the suit's workings. After several months of constant study, Hank Pym bestowed his knowledge of how to repair the suit and how to replicate and create stable Pym particles. Sighing to himself, Scott continued to eat his meal, his mind feeling a bit exhausted from all the information that he has had to learn in the span of a short time. So much had changed for him so quickly. Now, he felt so overwhelmed with all these new responsibilities. Thankfully, he wasn't alone in his studies nor his training. Hope Van Dyne had become an integral pillar in his new life, often helping him in so many different ways. Soon after, much to Scott's astonishment, Hope had her own suit and had taken up Mother's mantle of the Wasp. Scott figured that would be the coolest way for his daughter Cassie to meet Hope, suit and all. Her reaction was simply precious, instantly earning a special place in Hope's eye, as she was easily taken with Peanut's infectious happy personality. There was a natural tension between Hope and Scott, though not in the conventional sense. They did kiss after all, among other things, since he first became Ant-Man, and now here he was taking her out for breakfast at a diner. As his boyfriend. So how's Hank's upgrades for you coming along? Scott asked while wolfing down some waffles. We're just about finished with it. Some tweaks needed here and there until we can do a field test. Hope replied, taking a sip of her coffee while reviewing some blueprints of the quantum portal that they had been working on. How's Cassie? She is doing great. Scott stated with a loving fatherly smile. She says hi and got us a few little gifts. Does she now? Hope said in amusement. Oh yeah. Scott nodded with a laugh, rummaging in his backpack and pulling out a medallion and a trophy. She gave me this one. Scott wagged the trophy, holding out the medallion next. And you, this one. Taking both medal and trophy in hand, Hope snorted and chuckled. World's greatest grandma. Hope couldn't help herself. And best stepsister. Scott said with a wide grin. Well, I feel honored. Hope said, gazing at her medal fondly, placing beside her plate. Hank's been meaning to test out the growth aspect. Scott groaned. Again? I knocked out after the first time. Didn't wake up for hours. He set the dosage to high and not the proper stabilization. Hope admitted Dad figured that out after the first time. Really? Scott said dryly, letting out a sigh. Hey. Hope placed her hand over his. Don't worry about it, you'll get the hang of it. Scott gave her a grateful expression, twisting his hand around to squeeze hers. It was then that something behind her caught Scott's attention. More like someone. A certain someone who he had encountered not too long ago. Scott's eyes widened in disbelief, confusing Hope, who turned to see what Scott was staring at only to share his expression soon after. Guess I came at a bad time. Sam said, smirking down at the two. Didn't realize you were in the middle of a date. Was all Scott managed out. What's up, Tic-Tac? Sam said. Scott stammered for several moments before shaking his head to clear his jumbled up thoughts. Listen. Scott said right away. About last time, it was really important that I... Sam interrupted, somewhat embarrassed at the memory. It was a great audition, but it'll never happen again. Yes, I completely agree, Scott said quickly. It was a one-off. I just needed something so I could stop this lunatic from helping out Hydra, so I could. I think that more than qualifies you for what I'm about to ask. A different male voice cut in this time, making Scott pause. Glancing up to his right, Scott's eyes widened in shock and awe, as it was none other than Captain America looking down at him with a friendly smile. Mr. Lang, Steve said, Ms. Van Dyne. A pleasure to meet you both at last. Steve offered his hand, and after realizing what Cap did, Scott stood up in a rush. Captain America. Scott said, shaking Steve's hand vigorously. Scott. Steve said, not minding the enthusiastic handshake. It's an honor, Scott said, looking at their shaking hands. I'm shaking your hand too long. With that, the two let go. Wow. Scott said like a little fanboy, looking to Hope, who was still greatly surprised by who she was meeting. This is awesome. Captain America. Scott repeated once more, still trying to come to terms with standing in front of his idol. Scott then grabbed both of Steve's shoulders, marveling at his physique. Sam only snorted at the action. Geez, this is insane. Scott said when he realized something. Wait, why are you here? And did I inadvertently do something bad again? I mean, Hope was with me, so I don't think I did. Captain. Hope spoke up, recovering from her previous state. If this isn't about our time raiding your base, then what's this for? Steve gestured for them all to sit, which they did. It has nothing to do with anything that you've done in the past. Steve said, we've read up on your resume. Impressive for a convicted criminal. Listen, what I did against Vistacorp. Scott tried to defend himself, but Steve held his hands up. We read up on it before, Steve said calmly. After reviewing what happened, we know you're in the right. Scott began to stutter in disbelief as one of Earth's mightiest heroes just said that he believed and approved of his past actions. Which is why, Scott Lang. Steve said in more serious tone, extending his hand, we would like to personally invite you to join the Avengers. Scott's jaw dropped, almost looking like it was about to fall off. Hope's eyes widened to the size of dinner plates at the proposition, looking at Sam to see if this was some sort of falsehood, only to see that it was clearly not. Me? Scott stammered, finding his voice. You? Steve nodded. Scott was stunned silent once again, going up to pinch himself. This isn't a dream, is it? No, Mr. Lang, it is not. Can Hope join too, then? Scott blurted out hopefully. That night. Absolutely not. Hank Pym stated angrily from behind his workstation in their lab. Come on, Hank, please. Scott begged. This is not something we can just brush off. Yes, we can. Hank said sternly. And I just did. But it's the Avengers. Scott emphasized. And they work for Tony Stark and S.H.I.E.L.D. Hank argued back. And you know my history with Starks and S.H.I.E.L.D. Well, technically S.H.I.E.L.D. is defunct now, Dad. Hope pointed out. If not entirely. Don't you start with me. Hank deadpanned, walking away from them only for both to follow. Hank. Scott called out to him. Why are you so against this? Because I can't trust a couple of super people who have caused more harm than good to this world, especially with my tech. Hank said. They were even formed by S.H.I.E.L.D. But only 2 of them were S.H.I.E.L.D. operatives, Hope said, recalling the public information on the team. Hope. Hank said, somewhat betrayed. Don't tell me you also want this. Well, she stammered momentarily, kind of, yeah, I do want this. Why on earth would you want that? Hank exclaimed. Because I always wanted to be a hero like you and Mom. Hope nearly yelled out, stunning Hank into silence. Hope, Hank said softly. Hope averted her eyes to the ground momentarily, biting her lip and curling up her fist. I've always wanted to be a hero like you and Mom, Hope repeated in a small voice. That was my dream as a kid, and now I have the chance to do it more than ever. That took both Scott and Hank by surprise. They never would have expected such a fantastical dream from Hope, who was usually so grounded. She looked up at her father with a fierce gaze. I remember that even though it was dangerous, you and Mom did what was necessary to help fight for a greater purpose. Hope said. We were working for Hydra, sweetheart. Hank countered sullenly. We were benefiting an organization that manipulated so much. But you still helped people, Hope countered. You and Mom went out of your way to save lives and help those in need. I want to do that with the people who actually took down the very organization you despised. Hank remained silent, unsure of how to respond. Hank. Scott said. Listen, I know this isn't my place to say it, but you told both of us once that power can be trusted when placed in the right hands. But the Avengers. Hank said challengingly. Yes, the Avengers. Hope argued, now steely determined. This could be our chance to add, not only to make a difference, but we could also have them help us find Mom. Hank mouth open to respond, trying to counter her, ready to state that they could do it on their own. But he was outnumbered here. And the truth of the matter is that even with their tech, it may take a very long time in constructing the quantum tunnel into the quantum realm. Sighing in defeat, Hank gave them both a scrutinizing stare to find any weakness, but conceded. Alright. Hank said in slight resignation. You can join them. Scene cut. Whilst the trio of PIM particle users discussed the topic of Avengers memberships, one former Avenger was currently in the old tower hard at work on his next suit. Beside him were a collection of screens displaying video footage of a multitude of individuals that have had very high-profile activities throughout the state of New York. In particular, Queens and Manhattan. The Devil of Hell's Kitchen, the Drunk Detective, the Unbreakable Man of Harlem, the Man with the Glowing Fist, and the Spider of Queens. Such a colorful and eclectic group of enhanced individuals. Not unlike the Avengers in many ways, just more grounded, so to speak. He brought up the one that interested him the most right now. The spitterling, crime-fighting spider, or whatever it was that he called himself. He was eyeing the footage he had managed to find with great interest. From entrapping a car thief to literally stop a car with robbers mere inches from a bus, this kid was something special. And yes, he knew it was kid. Based on the footage and sound he had gotten his hands on, where his voice was clear and present, this spider guy was clearly just a kid. Question is, who was the kid beneath the mask? After sending out a drone, yes, that's creepier than it sounds, to seek after the spider, he at long last found out that the kid lived in Forest Hills, Queens, New York. Running facial recognition scans, the kid's name was Peter Parker, who currently lived with his Aunt May Parker. Then there was this Luke Cage, the Unbreakable Man. He seemed determined to keep Harlem safe and was doing a good job at it. Along with all these other vigilantes that had been active across the city. Tony himself had mused and wondered what was it that caused this surge in enhanced individuals becoming such public figureheads. Before he could delve further into his research, he got a notification from the Avengers base in upstate. Opening the message, Steve had sent him an invitation in apparently welcoming the 2 newest members to the Avenger the following week. Ha, guess shawarma's back on the menu. 1 more week later. The team was gathered together in the meeting room, all in costume, as today was a very important day in the Avengers' history. For the first time ever, they were about to have new Avengers join the team. And this time, it was without any conflict or major event that required additional support. It was simply the team welcoming more heroes into something bigger. So after a long week of preparation and debate, Steve said to the entire team, I would like you all to formally meet and welcome our newest members, Scott Lang the Ant-Man and Hope Van Dyne the Wasp. Scott Lang walked in the meeting room in full costume Civil War variant, with HOP the one seen in Ant-Man and the Wasp, in her suit as well. Their masks flipped back, revealing one who was nervous and another who was positively beaming. When Scott told Cassie, she was ecstatic to know that her daddy and hero would be joining Earth's mightiest heroes, along with his partner and girlfriend Hope. Guys, Scott said abashedly. This is too much. Gotta make you feel welcome, Tic Tac. Falcon said graciously, shaking hands with the new Avengers. We were new once, Pietro remarked. You got in the same way we did. How was that? Hope asked. We ended up fighting one another originally, Wanda said, rubbing her arm in embarrassment. It was a bit of a, well, a really big misunderstanding. Scott and Hope blinked at the witch. Yes. Vision said in his solemn voice, I recall at the time of my birth I attacked Thor before coming to my senses. Scott just stared between the trio, back and forth. Alright guys, Steve said, placing a hand on Scott's shoulder with clear amusement. I think it's high time we show you the full base. Sounds like fun, Scott said. You're gonna love it here, Pietro said. They have a bunch of shit I didn't even know existed. The team went about the facility, showing Scott the multiple rooms from the science lab to the kitchen, the lounge, theater room and so on. And this, Steve said, entering a very large plaza, is the training room. Whoa, Scott exclaimed, this is awesome. We could actually do the crazy things I've been working on. Save it for another time, Rhodey said. It's time for your initiation. Initiation? Scott said with some nervousness. What kind of initiation? Like freshman, no more Mr. Nice Guy or frat boy level stuff. Sam laughed, patting the new Avenger on the shoulder. No man, nothing like that. This is more of a, Steve tried to pick the proper words, taste test. Scott tilted his head in confusion. Taste test? Hope repeated. Ah dang it, was I too late already? Everyone turned back to see Iron Man walk into the training room with a large brown paper bag the size of a suitcase. Actually, you came just on time, Shellhead, Black Widow remarked. So you're Ant-Man and Wasp. Tony's helmet collapsed back. Nice to meet you both, Tony Stark. Scott Lang. Scott introduced himself a bit nervously. Hope Van Dyne, Hope said with a more even tone. Both shook hands with the billionaire superhero, with his eyes trailing on Hope momentarily. You're Hank and Janet's kid, right? Hope blinked at the question. You knew Mom and Dad? Hope asked in slight disbelief. I knew of your dad, yeah, and his history with mine, Tony said dryly. Not surprised your dad didn't get along with mine. Your mom, on the other hand, met her a few times when I was a kid before she vanished. There was a bit of a tense silence that followed afterwards, which Tony realized he had done, which in turn made him quickly hold out the brown bag. Shawarma. It's the initiation, Tony said in rapid succession. Scene cut. It had been 2 months since Ant-Man and the Wasp had joined the Avengers, and life went on for the team as usual. They trained, ate, spent time together while splitting up as usual to do their own things. Scott had even brought in his daughter at one point, which led her to being very fondly remembered by the team. Especially Vision. As Scott stated, kids have a weird penchant for guys like Vision. He's just those kinds of people where you can't really hate. Like you want to, just way more red and green like Christmas. Of course that all eventually had to come to an end. There was an emergency meeting called upon by Captain America. Everyone, Cap said in total seriousness, leaning upon the table within the meeting room of the facility. As you know, since the collapse of S.H.I.E.L.D., Hydra went down with it, but has remained active underground for the past 2 years with many splintered groups. Behind Cap, the viewing screen turned on, showing a mountainous European village that seemed a bit too familiar to several of the Avengers. Thanks to some of Nick Fury's old contacts, there has been whispers of a Hydra base stationed just outside this village. The screen now showed a metal door that was built into the base of the mountain. This is their base of operations, Steve said, but we can't discount what they could be hiding in the nearby village or the area surrounding it. Which is why we're going to be split up into 3 teams. Sam, Pietro and Wanda, the 3 of you will be investigating the town. Try asking around to see if they had seen anything suspicious. The selected trio nodded. Vision, Rhodey, Hope, the 3 of you will be surveying the surrounding area, Steve said to the second team. They might have outposts and some leftover Chitauri-enhanced technology at their disposal. If you find them, take them out and bring the tech in. Copy that, Rhodes said while Vision simply nodded. Nad, Scott, Steve said to the remaining 2 Avengers, you 2 will be with me. We're going right into the base. Simple reconnaissance and infiltration before the rest of us storm in. See what information we can find, what else they've been working on, possibly even locations to other Hydra bases. Nat acknowledged the order, and Scott let out a breath of anticipation and anxiety. Let's move, Steve said, and the team all went to the Quinjet bay. Anything else we should know? Sam asked as they boarded the Quinjet. Yeah, Steve said with a somewhat agitated tone. Turns out that this Hydra base has the scraps of an old friend of ours, Ultron. That alarmed the Avengers, but was quickly placated by Steve. Don't worry, Steve said, it's not Ultron himself, least I don't think it is. Vision saw to that personally. Hydra has collected many drones and bodies, every scrap of Ultron and his army. So whilst we aren't dealing with Ultron directly, we may be facing his leftovers. The Quinjet lifted up into the air, coordinates placed in, and away they went. Most of the team was silent, with only Sam and Steve conversing softly with one another. Ant-Man was sitting with his hands interlaced, staring at the ground intently, somewhat fidgeting in his seat. You alright? Hope asked in the seat beside Scott, nudging him with her shoulder. Just a bit nervous, Scott admitted. Hey, we've trained for this with and without the Avengers, Hope said confidently. Actually, it was more like, just the two of us, and we weren't fighting anything too crazy. Scott trailed off, not sure of his words. You'll both do fine, said an accented voice. Scott and Hope glanced up to see Wanda now moving to sit beside them. Wanda gave them an understanding expression. I felt the same way when I first fought alongside the Avengers, Wanda said, sitting down beside him. I remember feeling like I was in over my head. Wanda laughed at herself, which is ironic considering that I was fighting them without knowing who I was fighting for. Like always. Scott felt a pang of sympathy for the Sokovian. She, like her brother at a point, believed in what they were fighting for until reality told them it was a lie. And now they're using this opportunity in time for redemption. Meanwhile, Steve was conversing with Tony, who was at the old Avengers Tower. You sure you don't want to tag along, Tony? Steve asked. Might need the help. Not Cap, Tony said from the other line. As the Avengers consultant, all I can do right now is advise you. Besides, the new and improved Quinjet would be there and back again, before I could even have a chance to suit up. Steve stared at the screen with Tony on it, who was idly putting together some new invention. Sighing, Steve gave his friend a grin. Alright, your loss. Have fun, Tony said cheekily, the line disconnecting. Arriving at destination in 10 minutes. An artificial male Russian voice said to the team. Thanks, Tap, Steve said to the Avengers' personal AI, nicknamed Tap. No problem, Comrade Captain, Tap said gruffly. Is it wrong to say I still find it weird that Tony gave us a Russian AI? Sam said to the team. I think he did it intentionally, Rhodey said with a knowing look. Probably some ulterior jab at Wanda and Pietro, or at Nat, or he just wanted to screw with us. Probably the latter, or all the above. Humor, Vision said in contemplation. I still find this human concept unusual. Well, it's not really just a human, Viz, Wanda said to the android. It's something a lot of people use to deal with situations. Over the past year, since his creation, Vision had been trying to adjust to his very existence with humanity. Most of the team has seen him reading books on human culture, religion, society, and so on, as well as constantly watching television and the internet. It was amusing most of the time to see it being such an odd duck. So wise and yet so naive. Vision seemed to have formed an odd friendship with the twins, and constantly is a source of Pietro's jokes, but sadly, the android is none the aware of it all, unless Wanda reprimands him. So we're facing Ultron's leftovers. Nat murmured to herself, even now, he's still after us. It's not him, Steve said to the former spy, it's just scrap metal, leftovers. Steve looked back to the team, nothing we haven't handled before. Of course, that boost in confidence changed in an instant when the team's eyes widened in shock, jaws dropping. Cap looked back up front and saw two large pairs of bluish synthetic eyes looking directly at them. Steve's reflexes kicked in, and the leader of the Avengers pulled the ship up into a sharp angle, avoiding crashing into a gigantic robot. What the hell was that? Pietro exclaimed in shock. Flyers, get out there now, Steve barked to the Avengers, opening the back ramp. War Machine's face plate slid on, as did Hope's helmet. Falcon jumped out, Vision phased through the bottom of the jet, Scarlet Witch engulfed herself, and floated out with Pietro going with her in a red sphere. Steve banked a hard left, narrowly avoiding a gigantic metal hand. That's a lot of scraps, Falcon said on the comm link while flying around outside. Looks like a supersized Ultron drone, Rhodey commented. Hydra must have created this machine with a combination of the remains. Vision surmised. Scott, looks like we're going to have to get in this earlier than usual, Steve said to Ant-Man, who was already using his abilities. Way ahead of you, Cap, Scott said, and Steve and Nat heard a buzzing sound they had become familiar with over the course of the past several months. Ant-Man then shrank down, landing on a flying ant in the middle of his ant legion. Let's get in the fight, Cap, Nat said. Steve simply put the jet on autopilot, and with Nat moved to the edge of the ramp. Down below they saw the Avengers had now engaged with the gigantic Hydra robot that stood in the center of the village. Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch were doing crowd control, rushing over to civilians to get them to safety whilst Vision, Falcon, War Machine, Wasp and Ant-Man kept the attention of the machine. Avengers assemble, Steve said to himself, leaping out of the Quinjet in a freefall. Nat shook her head at seeing Cap once again pull off his no-shoot fall, and then jumped out after him. Cap continued to freefall until he pivoted his body and threw his shield with all his might. The shield smashed and ricocheted of the palm of the gigantic robot's hand. The machine retracted its hand and now began swinging around to hit the flyers in the air that fired beams, bullets and miniature missiles at its head. Down below, as Steve fell to the ground, he saw the bluish-silver trail of Pietro running about getting people to safety, with Wanda doing the same. "Village is clear, Cap," Pietro said in the comms. "Good job, you two," Cap said, moving his body around, feet first, as a translucent red slide appeared beneath him. The red energy caught him and Nat, the two descending down, landing next to Wanda and Pietro. "What's the game plan, Cap?" War Machine asked, his shoulder minigun firing away at the machine's arms. "This thing is called Ultimo 3, Falcon stated. "How the heck do you know that?" Rhodey asked. "It's on the back of his head," Falcon pointed out. "I did not notice," the Vision said in moderate surprise. "Is this a human thing? To brand creation?" "Ask Tony that next time you see him," Steve said. "Alright team, the plan is simple. This thing may be large and made out of Ultron, but that's just it, it's scrap metal. So lure the big guy away from the village into the mountains and tear the bastard apart." "Copy that," Sam said. "What are you gonna do?" "Scott, Nat, Hope," Steve said, "the three of you are with me. We're gonna storm the base and take it out. See what else we can find out about Hydra." "Way ahead of you, Captain," Ant-Man said. "I've already got a swarm of my ants inside the base, scouting it out." "Great job, Scott," Steve praised. "Think you can get the door open?" "Looks like that won't be necessary," Steve, Nat said, pointing towards the mountain door, which opened up, and out ran Hydra agents with Ultron drone-type armor and Chitauri-based weaponry. "This should be interesting then," Steve said. Cap's group ran towards the oncoming Hydra agents, with Wasp and Ant-Man shrinking down during their charge, and Nat running along with Cap, brandishing her electrified batons. Throwing his shield, the vibranium disc bounced between the oncoming soldiers before returning to its owner's hand. Scott and Hope had taken to striking specific parts of their heads to take them out quickly, with Nat using her batons to electrocute or whack them into unconsciousness. The other Avengers in the meantime were battling Ultimo with everything they had, dodging and weaving its surprisingly large fast frame. Eyes aglow, Ultimo targeted Wanda from a beam shot, but the Sokovian managed to repel it with an impromptu shield, cringing greatly from the impact of the energy upon her barrier. Vision quickly relieved her with a punch to the side of Ultimo's head. Wanda released her shield and flew up into the air, weaving her hands to create a platform for Pietro to run on. Wielding a sharp pipe, Quicksilver launched himself at full speed, jamming the pipe into Ultimo's eye. It lumbered back, reaching up to grab Pietro, only for War Machine to fly by and grab the speedster away to safety. Falcon launched several missiles at the giant robot, blindsiding it, allowing for Vision to slam itself into his stomach. Within the base, Steve, Nat, Scott and Hope were cleaning house. Thanks to past experiences with their raid of Hydra bases, Widow and Cap were making quick work of the Hydra soldiers, with Ant-Man and Wasp doing the same thanks to their instruction these past few months. Wasp's wrist-mounted bolt stingers were proving to their job quite effectively, as each one she fired off took out any and all Hydra goons she targeted. Ant-Man had also displayed a more efficient fighting style, as he jumped between each soldier using his strength and the assistance of his ants to take out enemies left and right. At one point, Scott had even made Steve throw him at another oncoming wave of Hydra soldiers. The force of the throw, on top of Scott's own enhanced strength, knocked out several Hydra agents right away, while sending the rest stumbling. The others capitalized on this advantage and beat down the rest of them. They powered through the rest of the base, fighting quick, hard and precise to take out the guards and secure the base. Back outside, the other Avengers continued to fight Ultimo, the machine now in complete disarray at the amount of heroes fighting it. Its programming had been upgraded greatly since its last two predecessors, but still it has never been tested against a group like the Avengers. So it was completely unaware of the red energy that was slowly making its way inside its body to its core. "Found you," Scarlet Witch declared before she let her power explode. Ultimo halted its attack. Suddenly, the machine began trembling before convulsing. Its mouth then opened and then, boom. Ultimo blew up from within seconds and ultimately fell apart. All that was left was the top half of Ultimo's head. There was a brief moment of silence. "Damn," Pietro exclaimed. "Nice on, sis." "You got that right," Falcon said, the team now assembling around the head of the destroyed robot in victory while contacting Steve. "Cap, Big Bot's been taken down." "Good job," Steve praised. "We're just about done in here as well. Make a sweep of the area and come rendezvous inside the base." After doing as Cap instructed, the rest of the team entered the base. What none of them had expected was the buzzing of ants floating around above them, forming an arrow in the direction where the other Avengers were. "That's actually nifty," Sam commented, following the direction of the ants. They soon entered a lab with Widow and Wasp sifting through files and other computers, while a large group of scientists and soldiers were bound together in the center of the room. "This is a big one," Black Widow addressed the group that had just entered. "They've got huge data caches of experimental tech that would make Stark's head spin. Wonder what they were working on here then," Sam said in thought. Cap went on ahead with Scott. Wasp informed, gesturing her head towards another door on the other end of the room. As Steve and Scott were ahead of the group, they were the first to reach the final room in the base, which was incredibly large, almost about the size of the Avengers' Quinjet Bay. All around the room were computers, and in the center, an odd gyro-like machine that had lights lined around the circular pieces, dimly lit. "Geez, Hank would love a place like this," Scott said aloud in wonder. "Maybe he'd make sense of everything in here," Steve said, looking around the room. Moving forward, Cap began investigating the room, going from computer to computer. "Found something interesting." Steve jolted somewhat, looking over to see Widow, Sam and Rhodey enter the room. "Damn," Rhodey murmured, "what the hell is this place?" Hydra's objective, Steve's surmise. What they tried to hide caused this seems to be the last room in the base. The silver-bluish blur then dashed into the room, running in several circles, screeching to a halt in front of a computer. "Well," Pietro said, "this is different from before. Not like the base where Wanda and I got our powers." "How is that base like?" Rhodey asked. "Very encompassing, depressing and cause claustrophobia," Pietro replied, casually, making the team stare at him. Not noticing the stares as he had his attention on the contraption in the middle, Steve turned to Widow. "Nat. On it." Natasha went up to the center computer, plugged in a kind of transfer chip in and began typing away. Steve then got an incoming communications from none other than, "Well, hello beautiful," said the voice of a giddy Tony Stark. "What have you found for me today, Cap?" "Something I think you should be here for," Steve remarked. "It's like Candyland for you here." "Whoa," said the voice of Ant-Man as he entered the room with the remaining Avengers. "This is like Stargate-level sci-fi here." "What have you got for us here, Tony?" Steve asked through the communication pieces. "Experimental tech, to say the least," Tony said, clearly impressed with what he was looking at. "The data here suggests that whatever they were working on was, as most geeks would say in this day and age, some next-level shit." "How next level?" Rhodey asked. "Oh boy," Tony said, "the million-dollar question." There was momentary silence from the other end. The Avengers continued to move about the room, examining everything. Pietro was on one knee as he was looking at some kind of screen. Tilting his head in interest, Pietro pressed on the screen and, like most tech in this century, reacted to his touch and displayed some techno mumbo-jumbo that was beyond him. Scratching his chin in thought, Quicksilver pressed the first icon that caught his interest, which just so happened to be a video. The video was of the contraption being put to a test. In the video, Hydra scientists surrounded the machine as it whirled to life. In the center of the swirling circles, an odd energy substance could be clearly seen. The scientists spoke in another language German. Pietro thought, seemingly speaking about the machine. Then came some testing as one of the scientists lifted up a bottle of water and tossed it into the swirling substance. The bottle was sucked in and there were some beeping noises. Pietro was now fascinated and began exploring more of these videos, seeing Hydra constantly toss random items into the swirling mass that they sent into the swirling mass. Then they upped the ante. In the next video, a Hydra agent was geared up in some heavy-duty armor of tech and had rope attached to his back. Getting a thumbs up from one of the scientists, the agent entered the portal, vanishing entirely, yet the rope remained until it didn't and vanished. This sent the group of scientists into a frenzy, trying to figure out what went wrong before the video cut out, ending the long playlist. Pietro looked up at the machine, now in slight awe and nervousness being around this thing. Pietro could only give a toss-up of what it does exactly, but right now, he didn't really want to find out. The rest of the Avengers were completely unaware of what Pietro had just witnessed, now surrounding Captain America, as he conversed with Tony on their find. Of course none of that mattered when the room began to vibrate. The rest of the Avengers had rushed in alarm and readiness at hearing the sudden vibration that shook the room nearby. The team tensed and were now on the defensive. Suddenly the machine activated and began whirling around at a fast rate, not even bothering to start up slow. The door then closed and a grid encompassed the room before fading. Steve and several of the Avengers ran up to the door and tried reaching for the handle, only to get zapped back. Vision attempted to turn transparent and phase through the wall, but was met with the same result. This scared the Avengers as now they saw the machine's gyrosphere was spinning faster and faster until it was a blur. Tony tried reaching out to them, but they heard static seconds later. The gyrosphere had produced a swirling bluish-white energy portal when the contraption began to produce static, electricity jumping about its structure. Avengers Steve shouted out, "Brace yourselves." The group gathered together just as the energy collapsed on itself, disappearing in a blink. A second passed and then the energy exploded, engulfing the Avengers and blinding them. The last thing they all saw was a bright light and felt themselves being pulled into the center of the room. And then they knew no more. The light dimmed, revealing an empty room, the machine slowing down to a jerking halt. Wires were now hanging from the ceiling and computer, and there were pieces of rubble on the ground crumbling from the ceiling. Then at last, the room went silent. Nothing but the leftover hum of the room.